actually think I was just the right guy at the right place at the right time, let me say it one more time. If you actually think that I was just the right guy.
These videos are not for children. If you are a children, then piss off.
This is pro wrestling's original reality TV star, featured on Talkin' Shopomania, and Matt Cardona's worst nightmare, Rapid Delivery Rory Fox, and you're watching V Reviews. Haha.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, V Infuso. There's a lot of hand motions I did just there, very unnecessary. Almost as unnecessary as wearing fingerless gloves, but I still do that, so here we are. Now, previously, I was joined by Top 10 Wrestling and taking a look back at some of the absolute worst moments of the Ruthless Aggression era. But upon further review, I realized I didn't even scratch the surface. There's actually so much wrong with this period of time in wrestling that I don't even think this video is gonna cover it. But I'll tell you what, I'ma try. And in order to make this video properly, I need to team up with someone who knows wrestling. And I know just the guy.
First and foremost, thank you to you, V, for having me back on your channel. And as for everybody watching, if you're not subscribed to this channel, then go ahead and do so now. But as for the rest of this video, let's get right into things. The Ruthless Aggression era, most known for committing the crime of not being the Attitude Era, a crime which pretty much every year in WWE ever since has been guilty of, at least as far as many fans are concerned. But what's really interesting is, when you go back and look at things, it actually was really good in certain parts, especially when it comes to the roster, when we have wrestlers like Kurt Angle, Eddie Guerrero, you know, that guy, all part of the main event scene. Well, this is probably some of the best mechanics that we've ever had towards the top of WWE. However, as good as all that is, that's ultimately what kind of makes the bad parts really stand out. Now, what are some of these low points? Well, let's just go ahead and get into it. First on the list, we have Simon Dean. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, Simon Dean went by the name of Nova over in Extreme Championship Wrestling, or Hollywood Nova when he was a part of the BWO, the Blue World Order, an hysterical parody of the New World Order. Now, when you look at him this way, it becomes kind of confusing why WWE would take this naturally charismatic wrestler and turn him into an annoying heel, and also give him the character of Simon Dean, which kind of reminds me of when Shane Douglas turned into Dean Douglas. What's up with WWE and having to take ECW people and make them Deans? Anyway, the character was designed to be annoying, someone that you wanted to see get their comeuppance. However, the whole weight loss drink guru thing wasn't really a character that people had all that much animosity towards, or really thought about in any way, shape, or form outside of seeing Simon Dean. Furthermore, the bigger question is, why did they saddle Nova with this when they were having a relaunch of ECW? And while I was not a fan of WWE's ECW in any way, shape, or form, I will say that any little bit of credibility they could have added to it would have definitely helped. Now, nevertheless, Simon Nova, call him what you will, he would eventually move on to become a trainer at Ohio Valley, before eventually leaving the company. And while there really wasn't a lot of time there was still a small enough window that he could have been utilized for the WWE's ECW. And as far as I'm concerned, he definitely should have. Oh, and let's not forget this fantastic feud with Bobby Lashley that resulted in cheeseburger eating.
I don't know how in my last video I managed to neglect this one, as it's probably the most obvious, but one of the worst things about the Ruthless Aggression era was Triple H. And nothing specifically, but pretty much just everything about Triple H at the time. Let me just get this out of the way now and say I actually am a Triple H fan. I like the guy. Always have. I think he's had some great storytelling matches in the ring, and I think when the guy isn't starting off the show with a 20-minute promo, that he's pretty good on the mic. He's a decent babyface and an amazing heel. However, there comes a time when enough is enough. The same way that a lot of wrestling fans felt that John Cena was pushed to the top and shoved down their throats as the face of the company, Triple H was pushed to the top and shoved down our throats as the heel of the company. During this time, the man was hardly ever seen without a title belt around his waist, constantly defending his World Heavyweight Championship every chance he got, and only briefly losing it so that he could inevitably win it back again, almost instantly. In establishing himself, he buried everyone else around him at the time. Not only did he defeat most of the Raw roster, but he did so in such decisive fashion. His Evolution stablemate Randy Orton was referred to as the Legend Killer, but I think that name was equally fitting for the man who called himself the Game. His inability of putting anyone over and creating new stars, the company's over-reliance on him in the title picture, and the nonsensical, seemingly never-ending promos, I can't get over that, and they just never stopped. All of those things combined truly made his time at the top a reign of terror. And one of the worst victims of said reign was Booker T. I'm not saying that you can't have a storyline which involves racism. I'm not. Honestly, I think that there's a way to do that. And I don't think the fact that Triple H acted racist toward Booker T was the problem with this story. I think it's that Triple H was showcased as a racist and never got his comeuppance at the end of the story. Now, I know the company's hindsight history tries to rewrite and retcon this angle, and attempts to retell this story as Triple H degrading Booker T, not because he was black, but because he was either an entertainer or a WCW guy. But, I lived through this, and I ain't buying that shit. That's clearly not the case. He threw money at the guy in the bathroom and told him to get a towel. He once told Booker T to dance for him. Come on, we all knew what this was. Just own up to it and move on. And honestly, to me at least, all of that in a storyline would have been fine. Had Booker T come out on top, which he didn't. Had Booker T persevered and won the big one at that year's WrestleMania, I think we may even look back at this angle fondly. This could have been a story about Booker T overcoming adversity and etching his name in WWE history while doing so. But no! Instead, we had the evil racist dude get one over on the man he antagonized for months at the biggest stage of them all. This was just not a good look. For Triple H, for Booker T, for the company, for anyone looking, this was not a good look. Another big victim of the H-A Boy was none other than Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner. Upon re-entering the WWE, he was almost immediately placed into a feud with H-Cubed for his World Championship, immediately establishing credibility, and yet also somehow still immediately decrediting him. Wow, I sure did a good job of decrediting myself because the word is discredit. Decredit is not a word. No one in human history has said decredit before today, so that's where we're at. Proceed. This feud has to be seen as one of the absolute worst things in WWE history for many a reason. For one, Scott Steiner was not really physically ready to compete. Hence why this guy kept falling on his ass in the ring. A lot of people credit this as him being past his prime, but guys, Steiner's been past his prime for a while now, and he was working in TNA after this and doing just fine. Outside of Scott Steiner's injury, Triple H was at his Triple H-iest, and if the matches weren't bad enough, which they were, the promos were absolutely dreadful. A pose down, a push-up contest. I think it's safe to say that there's only one person this angle was impressing, and that someone was this guy. The matches were enough to make your eyes sore. The promos could make your ears bleed, and the whole thing was just tasteless.
Next, we have the world's largest love machine, Viscera. Well, when we talk about WWE's desperate attempts to try and reclaim the Attitude Era, well, Big Vis is just another example of that. Now, don't get me wrong, Viscera's talents as a comedic performer were really good here, but it's not the performance that was the problem so much as it was the overall gimmick. But this is just something that WWE does from time to time. They take an extremely large wrestler and they put him into some goofy, silly angle. Does anyone remember Shokishi? If you don't, I'm sorry for reminding you. The shtick of watching Viscera flirt with women got old pretty fast, and in the end, it really didn't do him any favors, nor the audience. Time for an RNN update, because we were up to 88% mobility. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Randy Orton was projected to be one of the next big superstars in WWE. However, right after his introduction, he suffered a shoulder injury, something that still kind of plagues him to this very day. Now, WWE really didn't know what to do. Did they pull him completely off camera, or did they keep him around to just be somewhat relevant? WWE chose the latter, giving him RNN, Randy News Network, a way for him to keep the fans updated on his current status during during his injury rehabilitation. These news updates were presented in an egotistical, smarmy kind of way, which was in contrast to how he was originally presented, as he came across more of a plucky babyface in the beginning. Furthermore, it is somewhat surprising that you would take a wrestler who is so green to the industry and give him that much screen time, especially since Randy definitely needed to hone his mic skills just a little bit more. And some would even argue that the Viper with the voices in his head is much better when he's being sadistic, mean, and scary, instead of just being a cocky, egotistical heel. But when you stop to think about it, the biggest issue with this is that it's a symbol of how much WWE has just favored Randy Orton right from the beginning. Because after a slew of wrestlers have been de-pushed or fired from the company just for being injured at the wrong time or needing surgery at the wrong time, like Bam Bam Bigelow, Randy Orton gets injured and gets an entire segment around it. Doesn't seem all that fair if you ask me.
Another strange decision of this time period saw The Undertaker feud with the Dudley Boys, having a not-so-glorified handicap match between the three of them, main event the Great American Bash, which was the first Great American Bash in WWE. Oh boy, what a way to sell a pay-per-view, and they did not. Now that's a strange choice in of itself. What was an even stranger choice was having Paul Bearer in a tank that was filling up with cement to add tension to the lukewarm match. And what was even stranger than that was to have The Undertaker win, thus saving his pseudo-father's life, only to then fill the tank up with cement himself and kill off his mentor.
Paul, rest in peace.
Undertaker! The cement!
I don't think a solid reason was ever given for such an action. I mean, he came back on screen next week and he said, "If I could do that to Paul Bearer, just imagine what I could do to you." That's not a reason! You killed your stepdad to make a point? That's cold-blooded. All in all, it just felt like this came out of left field, of an entirely different ballpark.
Oh, and another excruciatingly painful part of the Ruthless Aggression era was this is the time period where everybody started noticing how much WWE and Vince McMahon really hate tag teams. Now, instead of trying to reclaim the Attitude Era, they went a little further back than that, as they came up with a lot of goofy comedy tag acts like Deuce and Domino, the Dicks, or the Heartthrobs. I suppose they were trying to recapture the magic of the Bushwhackers and the Beverly Brothers, but that wasn't something that anybody was really asking for, especially coming off an amazing tag team division of the Dudleys, the Hardys, and Edge and Christian. Now, it would be one thing if these stupid comedy tag teams were just one part of the division and the rest of it was more fleshed out. However, when you look back on it and realize that the best part of it was either London and Kendrick being crapped on by Triple H or, I don't know, the Bashams or something, it really doesn't speak all that well for the tag division. In other words, the Ruthless Aggression era was a terrible time for being a team. We got spirit, yes we do. Look, I get the idea that when it comes to wrestling, a lot of times it boils down to some obnoxious heel that the fans just want to see get humbled. And when it comes to male cheerleaders, well, what wrestling fan likes them and doesn't despise them anyway? However, this was not a group that people were calling for or even really cared about. And it was also a perfectly good waste of a perfectly good Dolph Ziggler. How can you take a collegiate wrestling champion and saddle him in this stupid squadron instead of using him in a much better way right off the start? And it would be one thing if this was just way back in WWE's rearview mirror. However, they brought it up not that long ago and still can't figure out why Dolph Ziggler's main event push really never seems to land. The Spirit Squad perfectly encapsulates two major faux pas of the Ruthless Aggression era, where they take a heel and push them way too far until the audience is tired of them, and they also combine that with a goofy comedy tag team act. You got spirit? Yes you do, but maybe you shouldn't. The void left by The Rock, Stone Cold, and Foley was felt pretty large in the Ruthless Aggression era, especially when you look at the audience. There was a total lack of star power in WWE during this time period, and even though Vince McMahon and WWE really wanted to believe that Triple H and Edge were the two guys to put on top of the company who could carry the whole shebang, well, the numbers prove otherwise. Relentlessly putting two heels as champions non-stop really didn't do the company any favors. favors. And on the other end of that, when your baby faces are Batista and John Cena, two guys who are proven to have star power as they are successful actors in Hollywood right now, they just proved that they managed to blow that too by overexposing them as well. And as I mentioned earlier, during this time there were wrestlers like Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, and Rob Van Dam, all of which the fans really wanted to see get a major push. And while they did flirt with the main event or even hold the top title for a while, they were never given the full support to really be the face of the company, which is what fans really wanted to see. Now yes, I am perfectly aware that wrestlers with the star power of Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock are a rarity. However, when you look at all the years that have passed since, I think it's also plain to say that WWE just dropped the ball on a lot of wrestlers who may not have been that good, but could have at least been given a better shot.
During the Ruthless Aggression era, the WWE lost two of its biggest stars in its women's division. Way back before the Give Divas a Chance hashtag and the women's movement in the company, there were two female stars proving night and day that they were on par with the men in the company. And their names were John Cena! Yeah, I know, I'm sorry, I had to do it. Now back to your previously scheduled program. And their names were Trish Stratus and Lita, last name withheld. The two traded wins and championship reigns time and time again, and were even the main event of an episode of Raw, which was unheard of at that time. Let me put to you like this. Lita and Trish crawled, Trish literally, so that the modern day WWE women's division can run. When Trish Stratus left the company, she did so beating her longtime friend and rival Lita, and winning the women's championship on her way out, leaving the company with her head held high. But a few months later, Lita would not get that same courtesy. Deciding to take her leave due to the intrusive and negative nature of the fan base due to her own personal life decisions, we'll get there in a second, unlike her coworker and counterpart, she wasn't afforded that same exit. She'd lose her title to Mickie James, which was fair enough, typically you do put the next one over on your way out. But instead of getting the chance to say goodbye, or to be embraced by the fans one last time, Crime Time came out with her belongings and sold them to the crowd, giving away her bra and panties to audience members. And while that's bad enough on its own, they also found herpes medication and a vibrator in her box. And no, that is not a euphemism. She was humiliated on her way out the door, and even if there was a chunk of the WWE universe who were legitimately pissed at her for her real-life choices, even with that bad blood, I don't think this is the way that anybody wanted to say goodbye to Miss Congeniality. But hey, you remember way back when I talked about Lita's poor life decisions? Well, it's time to bring up those decisions. Lita had been in a long-time on-screen and off-screen relationship with Matt Hardy. She was the third member of Team Extreme, and a lot of wrestling fans have a lot of fond memories of the three. Well, unfortunately, somewhere down the line, she found herself in a very real-life affair with Matt Hardy's friend and their co-worker, Edge. When Matt Hardy learned of this, his heart was broken. No pun intended. And more importantly, his mind was warped. Matt brought their personal life public, having rightfully so felt wronged. This guy just wasn't using his head, his heart was doing all the thinking, and that's a dangerous place to be. He vented his frustrations to anyone and everyone who would listen, and probably several people who wouldn't. He also allegedly screwed with Edge's method of transportation a couple times as well. Now that's hearsay. Matt says he didn't still to this day, others say he probably did, who knows. Point is, something happened to Edge's car, the company was like, Matt, you did it. The company then took it upon themselves to fire the dude who was getting cheated on and promote the dude who his girlfriend cheated on him with. In Matt Hardy's absence, Edge climbed the top of the metaphorical ladder, cementing himself as a main eventer, and becoming the most hated man in WWE history. A shitty decision by the company morally, but business-wise, understandable. Matt Hardy definitely needed a break, and it was nice to see him come back after he had cleared his head a bit. When he returned, he had one hell of a feud with Edge, and truthfully, it was pretty legendary for the time. The feud was white hot due to the real-life heat between the two, and the fans were more than invested in their back and forth. If there was one thing I can complain about this, it's that it was a feud that definitely could have made both men stars and elevated both Edge and Matt Hardy to the next level, but instead, by the end of it, it just felt like Matt was being used as another step in Edge's metaphorical ladder that we spoke about a little bit earlier. Matt deserved better. I mean, that man could slap a tornado. But hey, while we're on the subject of Edge, let's talk about his sometimes brother, sometimes friend Christian. Christian and Edge had singles runs previously, but but they were probably best known for their time together as a team. And in late 2004, Christian really began coming into his own as a singles act. Following a haircut and a change of tights, the man looked like a legitimate star. His promo skills improved greatly. Not that they were bad before, but now they were Tony the Tiger great. His in-ring moveset expanded and he was now walking around with his own entourage. It seemed like the guy had the wrestling world in the palm of his hand. Unfortunately, that was not the case, as the great creator of said world, Vince McMahon, was never really a fan of the guy and apparently thought he looked a little bit too mousy. It's also probably why he gained the nickname Creepy Little Bastard around this time. I gotta say, in the early 2000s, Christian was putting in some serious work, and in my estimation, he had everything it took to be a star. Everything except for the guy in charge's approval, and that's unfortunately all that you really do need to be a star. So I guess he didn't have anything it took to be a star. While at the time he would receive a much more significant push than he'd previously gotten, it just wasn't meant to be, as Vince deemed him unworthy of the world title accolade. It's hard to look back at Christian's WWE run and not feel like it was a missed opportunity, especially after seeing how successful his TNA run was, and how right it felt to see him in the main event scene. Christian? You my boy, Christian. You my boy. But Captain Charisma wasn't alone, as the WWE misused a good chunk of its stars at the time. Why, take for example Goldberg. Goldberg was one of WCW's biggest stars, and also one of its only self-made stars. Upon entering the WWE, it seemed like he was being properly utilized, immediately finding himself in a feud with a high-caliber star like The Rock, and going over on him. But I don't think the company quite knew what to do with the former world champion, as his initial run with the company was filled with matches that went on 10 minutes too long, feuds that probably should have ran 2 months shorter, promos that required him to speak a little bit too much, and performances that required him to put over his opponent a little bit more than he'd previously been used to. I just don't think the WWE understood the Goldberg formula. And despite him racking up wins and a title victory, it just didn't feel like the same run that made him a star. Granted, Goldberg never found the same success he found when he first entered the business, but I think it's more than fair to say that his most recent run in the company is at least a little bit closer to it than his 2003 to 2004 run. But with that being said, Bill, please, for the love of God, just go home. You gave what you could to the business. There's nothing left for you to do other than to further tarnish your legacy. Please, just give it a break. I don't want to see you with the belt anymore. You're 6 years away from 60. Just stop it. Just call it a day. You did good. I say this with love. It's time to stop.
Now moving on to HLA. Eric Bischoff, in response to the gay wedding they had over on SmackDown, decided to have lesbians featured on his show. Now, the way these segments would work is Eric Bischoff would have 2 women come down to the ring to tease some sort of erotic interaction, and it usually would get broken up for one reason or another, such as 3-minute warning. Oh, and Stephanie McMahon even teased getting into the act before Eric Bischoff pulled a bait and switch on her. Now, my overall point here is that this wasn't a wrestling segment, and furthermore than that, it was a desperate attempt for WWE to try and cling on to the crash TV that was the Attitude Era, hoping that their ratings would go back up. The other issue is, well, how do I put it? Adult theme content was definitely more prevalent for adolescent males during 2002 than it was in the late 90s. The internet, while still in its infancy, was growing, and at this point it was more accessible than it ever had been. So you didn't need to turn to pseudo-porn in order to get your fix in. Instead, you could just go straight online. And with that being said, it's not surprising that just teasing tantalizing situations didn't do anything to raise their profile with the key demo. Now on the opposite end, let's look at some traditional family values. Not really, I'm going to be talking about La Familia. Without Eddie Guerrero around, WWE kindly offered Vickie Guerrero a job with the company, which I will say is gracious of them. However, she eventually turned heel and became a general manager, which really didn't sit well for me because after getting rid of the annoying screeching voice of Stephanie McMahon's, it was replaced with "Excuse me" by Vickie. This, in conjunction with the forever opportunist that is Edge, who is also famous for mowing another guy's lawn, resulted in the storyline of La Familia that saw the two of them get kayfabe married. Now, on the bright side, this was many fans' first introduction to Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins, who played Edge's young flunkies, which is also kind of weird to think about since Edge just won the Royal Rumble and those two are no longer with WWE, but I digress. The faction came to an end when Vicky's power as GM was removed, and it was revealed that Edge was only with her because the amount of control she had in the company, which really didn't surprise anyone. Now for me, this is one of the absolute worst things to happen in WWE just because I am notoriously not an Edge fan and I really didn't care for his reign of terror, which really did work to sour me to the product. And in addition to that, it would set the pace for Kurt Hawkins and Zack Ryder really not being used all that well in the company, and it would also continue WWE's annoying tradition of having a heel authority figure in control. So as far as I'm concerned, nothing about the La Familia storyline had any value whatsoever.
I know I'm not the first to say this, but I think it still needs to be said. Eddie Guerrero was an absolute legend both in life and in death. The man's legacy will never be forgotten. And even those who didn't grow up with him on their TV screens, they still know who he is and love what they've seen. Following his unfortunate, untimely demise, the WWE did what they could to keep his memory alive. That wasn't supposed to rhyme, by the way. They put out new merch commemorating his life, he got a new DVD, put him in their video games, made new action figures, included him in storylines. And now look, I really do have mixed feelings about this inclusion because on one hand, I think it's a really nice concept to continue to include a fallen friend in your creative projects. My buddy Brian Danovich passed away a few years back, and I go out of my way to include this clip of him as often as I can. But I do think they reached a point where it seemed like they were over-relying on his name recognition, and sometimes it seemed like he was only being mentioned or included in stories for shock value. Like having Randy Orton tell Rey Mysterio that Eddie was in hell, or having Orton disrespect his former coworker outside of one of his entrance cars. Eddie's passing also led to the rise of Rey Mysterio, which honestly really just kind of cheapened his entire title run, as the narrative being presented was that Rey only won the title due to Eddie's divine intervention. I get that the company was trying to have a feel-good moment, but I don't know, this just really didn't feel all that good. Feels pretty bad in hindsight. Feels not so great. And Chavo Guerrero around this time couldn't go a single match without the commentators bringing Eddie up at least 2 times during the duration of his match. Chris Benoit too, same exact thing.
Ugh. And then there's the reveal of Hornswoggle being Vince McMahon's illegitimate son. It's a swerve, bro. Now, I already covered this on my channel, Dave Knows Wrestling, where I talked about the art of the swerve, so if you want more detail on why this sucked, well, just go over there. But I also don't think you need all that much explaining. Nobody was looking for Vince McMahon to have an illegitimate son as a storyline, and if they were gonna go ahead and do that, nobody was wanting it to be Hornswoggle if they did, which is probably why they ultimately retconned it. But for those of you who may not know, there were rumors that the third McMahon child was originally supposed to be Mr. Kennedy. Kennedy instead of Hornswoggle. This was supposed to tie into the fact that Ken Kennedy's kayfabe last name was taken because it was Vince McMahon's middle name in real life. This was allegedly supposed to lead to a massive feud between Kennedy and Triple H, where Vince McMahon would declare that Triple H was his true son in spirit. But of course, since Kennedy wasn't all that popular backstage in WWE, well, we all know how that turned out. And lastly, we have the rise of JBL. Now, WWE has a lot of problems, and many of which happened during the Ruthless Aggression era. But one of the biggest, if not the biggest, is the idea that the WWE Championship was somehow rewarded to the guy that doesn't need it. You hear it all the time. People say, oh, this guy doesn't need the championship. Well, as far as I'm concerned, the man makes the championship, not the other way around. You don't give the belt to someone to try and boost them up and make them important. The champion is supposed to make the title important, and that is a very important distinction, and a lack thereof is probably why WWE's title scene has been very lackluster ever since. And one of the most egregious examples of this would have to be JBL. Not only was this done in order to create a new top heel because Triple H didn't want to work Tuesdays, but this was also done as a reward because Bradshaw taught all the wrestlers how to invest and made a lot of people a lot of money. And look, that's a good thing and I get it, but the belt shouldn't be a party favor for a job well done behind the scenes. It's supposed to be given to someone for doing a good job in wrestling, which just seems like common sense. But when it comes to WWE, common sense is in low supply.
But if I had to pinpoint what I felt was the absolute worst of the Ruthless Aggression era, more than Triple H's reign of terror, more than the mishandling of stars like Goldberg and Christian, more than Vince McMahon's Vince McMahonisms, standing, or more accurately, stripping above the rest, is the mistake named, and I'm probably going to get demonetized for this, was the mistake named Big Dick Johnson. That was his name. That was the guy's name. Christopher D. Joseph was a writer for WWE during the era in question, but he probably won't best be remembered for his contributions behind the screens, but rather his contributions on the screen. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of wish he would have contributed a little bit less. This man is etched in WWE history as the big fat oily stripper. He wasn't a wrestler. He didn't have anything resembling a match, but he did dance. He did dance, and I really wish he didn't, but he did. A lot. Just imagine those Kelly segments, which I'm sure a lot of us have fond memories of. How you doing? Just imagine those segments, except with this guy. That's what it was. That's what it was like.
Are you ready for some wrestling?
Well, there you go, my thoughts on the absolute worst parts of the Ruthless Aggression era. Again, please subscribe to Infuso's channel, and also, if you wouldn't mind, go over and check out my channel, Dave Knows Wrestling, as I would really appreciate that as well. Thanks again to UV for having me here, and let's take it back to you.
So with that being said, I want to thank Dave for joining me here today. If you guys haven't already, head on over to his channel, hit that big red subscribe button, and don't forget to let him know who sent you. This guy. As previously stated, I'm Infuso, y'all are the Degenerates, and I thank y'all for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.